Hi guys, this is Richard Coghill for Forest Schools Level 3, Unit 2, 2.1, Management and Lighting a Fire. I'm going to start off with a wee apology because the setup that I've got here today isn't just exactly what we were planning for Forest Schools, namely in that we would normally have a barrier around the fire, a distance, and then another barrier usually made up of logs that students and things can sit down on. The reason we don't have that today is that recently we've had a couple of pretty big storms around here, and they've brought some trees down in the exact area where we had our Forest Schools camp. So a little bit unfortunate, but we've got to kind of crack on and make best with what we've got. So we've come to an area of the forest that there's no trees down, it's a lot safer, and where we've had an old camp before. So I'll explain a little bit about the fire and what we've done for preparation and some safety aspects. Our number one safety aspect is when we're having a fire is that we've got landowner permission, and that in this area, we're in Scotland here, a lot of the area is made up of a stuff called peat, which is decayed forest, and it when it's dry it burns, so the soil itself in this area can burn and smoulder for a very long time, and you don't know that it's happening, and it can just smoulder and smoulder away, and then all of a sudden the wind will change and woof, we get big fire. So what we've done previously, we've dug out a large area of a fire pit, filled that with rocks, and then lined that with clay. There used to be a tree right here that we chopped down to clear the area, and then it's very safe. So in previous incarnations this has been a campfire, so I've just put a wee ring of stones around just to kind of define the area of which I'm going to work. Speaking for myself, I'm wearing clothes that lend itself to working with fire. I've got cotton trousers, leather boots, and wool and linen on the top layers. Basically that means that if a spark comes out of the fire, lands on my clothing, it might burn the clothing, it might burn me, but a spark, that'll be very small injury, but what it won't do is it won't ignite my clothes and turn me into a human torch. And that's something that we need to pass on to our students as well, that there's appropriate clothing to wear around the fire. We tell the students as well that we need to stay at a certain distance from the fire unless you're coming in specifically to work with the fire, to cook or to add logs or anything like that, but otherwise to respect the distance. Because we're in a bit of a more confined space here, my camp is a little bit more crowded, but normally we would keep logs in one place and any cooking equipment in one place so that there's no trip hazards or anything like that around the fire. In terms of safety, again, what we have on hand is over in my backpack up over there, we've got a fire blanket, and should someone catch fire we can wrap them in that, little good old stop, drop and roll. For minor burns, we've got a wee bucket with cold water in that you could submerge a hand, get that remeling around, and sorry, remeling is it's a local word, that move around to cool the burn down. And then obviously we've got a first aid pack as well with a burns kit in that. The other thing we tell the students to do is adopt the position that I'm in just now, which is known as the respect position, whenever we're within that boundary of the fire. And what that means is that if the fire falls over, or if there's some anomaly going on, then we can stand up and move away from the fire. Again, I'm going to apologise and say that I'm going to be working on my knees today. I've got kind of dodgy knees, I've got a bit of a dodgy arm as well, hopefully that shouldn't come into it today, but I'm using a little mat just to kind of save my knees. These are gardening mats, but I've actually tested this for fire as well. It smoulders and it and bubbles, but it doesn't ignite, so we should be safe enough. We've also got a pair of gloves that we can use to move logs around and deal with anything that's hot. Generally when I'm working with the fire, I tend to work with my hands. If it's too hot for my hands to touch, then I'll use a stick to manipulate the logs, but they're handy as well, especially if we're taking like hot pots and things off the fire. It just gives us a little bit of protection. For our fire itself, we're observing the fire triangle, meaning that we need heat, oxygen and fuel to get our fire going. The heat, or the spark of heat, we're going to use, this is a really good one that I learned from the forest school videos. I would normally call this a fire flash, but someone on the video called it a dragon sneeze. I love that. That's a great one to pass on to the kids. So that gives us a shower of sparks which will ignite our tinder. So that's where we're going to get our spark of heat from in our fire triangle. Oxygen, I think we've got plenty of oxygen around. If it gets scarce, I'll go off and get some. But I think we should be able to have enough within reach to add to our fire, and I'll use my lungs to kind of produce that in. In terms of fuel, we've got a mix here. I've brought in some just from a local petrol station, kiln dried wood. This is Scotland. The weather is extremely unpredictable. Just less than 5 minutes ago it was actually raining here, although it's stopped now. So I've got dried kindling, so that's kiln dried stuff. We've also got some larger kiln dried logs that we might use later on to cook something, but just to get our fire going, we've got grated kindling. What I've done is I've shredded some of this up, just with a knife to make wee shavings. I've cut some that is pencil thickness, so that's nonsense, it's not pencil thickness, this is matchstick thickness. Then we move on to pencil thickness, and then we move on to, I don't know, whiteboard marker thickness, and we've got some sort of 2 thumbs thickness in reserve if we need it. Over the other side of my camp, I've got some stuff that I've gathered from the forest. It's a mix of ages, and it will be a mix of kind of moistures, but once the fire is established, it'll be enough to dry that out and get a hold of that, and that's what we'll use as our main kind of fuel to get the fire going. On top of our prepared earth, I've also got a stand of the kindling, and it just stands like so, and that does a couple of things. Number one is that it raises my infant fire off the cold and damp earth, so that's not going to leach away the fire when it's small. It's also placed parallel to each other, so that'll let a certain amount of airflow, and we'll get that oxygen from our fire triangle into the base of the fire really early on, and hopefully get that nice and hot so that it'll catch the rest. The only other thing I think we need to speak about is that we've got some tinder. Now this is the bit that I'm most nervous about, because I've never actually used this kind of tinder before, but it was recommended on the forest school videos. And what we've got is some cotton pads. I've got one spare, so hopefully I'm going to do it first time. We're going to break that up, and then we're going to use the dragon sneeze to get that going. I'll then add the shavings, and then the matchstick thick, the pencil thick, the biro thick, and we'll build that up from there. Once I start with the fire, I'm probably not going to do too much talking. I'll concentrate on the fire itself. That's it, just starting to rain again. That's absolutely typical. And I'll keep that going for I think 10 minutes is what I need to do for you guys. But I'll be keeping the fire going. I'm going to do a couple of videos today, so hopefully the fire will keep going through the day, and we'll cook some food on it later on. I think that's more or less it. I'll probably disappear at a couple of times, because I'll need to nip round the back. I'm filming this on my phone, and then I realise I don't have a timer, so for the first video I'll need to keep popping around and see what the kind of timestamp is. So without further ado, let's maybe give this a try. Fire lighting's never a guarantee. You can light a fire the same way 100,000 times and there'll be just something different. One time and you'll end up having to think on your feet and do something different. So hopefully we'll get this one first time and I don't have to do the video all over again. Now I'm just popping that under there and almost making like a little house with some of the shavings, so that they'll kind of start burning as early as possible once the cotton wool goes up. These dragon sneezes throw out sparks that are extremely hot, but they're generally safe to use around and about the place. Once they travel much further than, I don't know, a couple of inches from the rod, they lose their heat very quickly. So it's not something that is too dangerous for a student to use. We've also got these strikers that this actually came attached to the flint itself. Some people kind of use knives and carbon steel to do that, but I've found it's not a great idea to have a sharp edge involved. Use the striker that comes with it. Right, so let's go. The way I always think of fire is that it's a little bit like a ladder. That if you had a ladder that all the rungs were a little bit close together, you wouldn't be able to make any progress, and that's just what the fire is like. But if you have too big of logs and it's too far for the fire to reach, it won't be able to climb either. So I do this in a rough kind of teepee kind of fashion. Building that up. This is nice and dry, nice hot fire. Now, something I like to do, let's see a good candidate, is get one of the larger logs and just kind of make a windbreak at the back, and that means that log will be drying out at a slightly faster pace. And we're going quite nicely here. Should hope so with kiln dried wood. That would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? Whilst that's just getting established, I'll take a moment just to put away my dragon sneeze, love that name, and my tinder, save that for next time, and a waterproof pouch. And then we'll start getting some of the bigger logs up. Typically where I've set up the video, that means that the fire is going to be blown into my face. That'll be great when the smoke goes. I'll move over slightly, hopefully I'm still in shot. I'm going to just start adding some of those larger logs. Hopefully that'll be us going. When we blow into the fire, obviously there's a certain danger of sparks coming into the face, and we just need to be aware of that. But probably a greater danger is that there's smoke coming off the fire. And if you get a lungful of smoke, it makes you cough and it stings your eyes. So when blowing into the fire, it's best to move away from the direction that the smoke's going. Don't get so close that it's going to burn yourself. And a long, slow blow, if it's kind of a blow, then it will blow the fire over. You end up with sparks going everywhere. And if it's a not enough, then it just has no effect at all. What I like to do is lean into the fire, exhale, and then as I need to inhale, I take my head away so that I'm not going to accidentally get a lungful of smoke, eyes stinging, and then you end up stumbling about the camp, not being able to see, not being able to breathe, and then you knock everything over and it's chaos. So we'll do it nice and controlled. I guess it's going quite nicely. Right, so I'm going to go and get some more sticks on. We'll build this up a little bit and then settle it in with some embers. The general rule I go by is if there's flames coming out of the top of your sticks, then it's okay to add more, as in if you want to get a larger fire. Go. I'm going to place some of these logs close to the fire so they can start benefiting from the heat of the fire. Start driving out some of the moisture that they've got. Particularly wet one, we'll keep that close. Now, having the stones around the fire isn't, in my opinion, strictly necessary. It doesn't actually stop the fire spreading. That should be done by controlling the wood or fuel that you're putting on there. But it helps to just give a little bit of a boundary of definition of where the fire starts, the danger area starts. Makes people think. I'm just going to toddle down to the back of the phone now and just check the timestamp, and then we can keep that going for 10 minutes. Tidy up. Whilst we've got nothing else to do. In the forest schools, we tend to always have fires like this. It's more towards the scale of a campfire rather than a bonfire. The issue with that is that we really want to protect the environment that we're in, not burn down the forest. In Scotland, as I say, with peat, that's even more important that we keep it to controlled areas. We also need to check that we don't have any overhanging canopy that could catch a light from our flames licking up. It's worth noting in this area we mainly have kind of pine trees, and they exude a sap, sort of pine sap, and that's flammable, which is great for lighting fires. It means that the wood burns really well, but it also means that if fires are situated too close to trees, or anything like that, then the trees themselves can go up in flames very quickly and with pretty terrible consequences. Yeah, we don't want any of that. We can make different fires depending on this type of fire that we want. This one here, I'm mainly wanting flame. I'm wanting the fire to leap up, give us a bit of brightness, a little bit of heat, although it's not too cold today. But we can manage our fire in different ways to get different results. Once we've got a good bed of embers in there, and it's the embers that's actually more important than the flames and the small sticks that are on the top, because the embers will give the fire a hearth as it's called. Once that's going, that's established, that'll hold heat for a good long time. One method of keeping that going is to take 4 logs like this and have them coming into the fire and meeting in the middle from all the cardinal directions. And just as they burn very slowly, you can feed them on and feed them on. And it's a handy way of keeping a fire just ticking over using minimal fuel, but then just adding a little bit more fuel, a little bit more oxygen. We can get the fire back to this stage very quickly indeed. If we wanted to use this as a signal fire, perhaps, to belch out lots of smoke, to sort of a rescue scenario if you like, then we can add green vegetation on top of that, and it'll belch out lots of either white or black smoke, which folk can see from miles and miles around. Today I used shavings from the kiln dried wood. If we wanted to use more natural materials, we could use things like birch bark. Works really well. I favour, from previous sort of bushcraft experience, I favour using a traditional flint and steel striker in use with charcloth, and that works really well with either birch bark, or one that I found works really well is if you can get a dry piece of Scots pine and shave that. Those shavings take a spark really well. In Scotland we have a bush that's very, very prevalent indeed, called the gorse bush. They have kind of spikes on it and little yellow flowers. It's everywhere around here, and if you get when it dies, it goes brown and dries because it's hung up in the air and it's suspended on the branch. Break those off, they become very brittle, and the needles themselves, they burn extremely well. So if you need a bright light, say on an evening if it was dark and you wanted light to tell stories by or some such, that would be very handy. I'll start getting some of these bigger logs on there. Notice this is a wee thing I do naturally. I try to pass these things on. So if you lean close to the fire, you put your hand on something like the rocks. Obviously, this fire's been going less than 10 minutes now. It's not going to pass on that heat to these rocks yet, but it's always good habit to kind of test anything that you go near the fire. You don't know if there's going to be a small spark there that came off and landed. You're going to put your hand on it, so it's always good to kind of test the heat of things around the fire before it's too late. Just going to push some of these on. Keep that fire nice and compact and workable. working with fire, especially with young people, it's not a case of will they get burned, it's when they will get burned. Small burns will happen, and we do everything we can to make that not happen, and if it does happen then we need to minimise it as much as possible. But obviously in the first aid kit we have a burns kit, we've got burn gel, but our main source of course is just water, which cools down the area very quickly indeed, and that's what we want. Now I'm laying these fairly straight on top of the fire here, and that will allow air to kind of pass through, but it'll start to slow down the burning process as well. The flames will die down, but the heart of the fire will keep going, and that'll sort of dry out these logs. I'm not going to use that one because that one's a bit too wet. You can see that it's slightly more wet logs now by the smoke that's coming up. That's what I mean, it makes your eyes close and then you can't do anything. It's very important that when that happens, it makes your eyes close, makes your eyes water. That what you don't do is stand up and move around, because then you'll trip and you could trip on the fire, which could burn you and spread the fire to all kinds of directions, so that wouldn't be very good at all. It's best just to close your eyes and wait for the smoke to pass. Ask for assistance if you need. I'm just going to check my timestamp. Now that brings us up to almost 10 minutes exactly, which is perfect. So I'm going to keep this fire in for the day. I'll be cooking on it later on, so hopefully I don't run it out. But thanks very much, and we'll see you in the next video.